competition brings out the best in products and the worst in people. David Sarnoff. Bending Not Breaking. Season 4, Episode 5. The Spirit of Competition. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine.
This is Ben.
And we are so excited to get to this episode.
Yeah.
A lot of fun stuff to talk about because if you couldn't tell by the cold open and the title of the episode, competition is going to be a pretty overarching theme.
In fact, it's the lens of
Oh my
this
goodness, it's
episode.
like we did this on purpose.
Except we didn't because the patrons picked
That's
it.
right, they did. They're so smart.
Aren't they great?
They're wonderful.
I do love them.
Love the patrons.
I love that we get to do live episodes with all of our patrons now on Patreon.
Yeah, once a month. Yeah, once a month. We've got several, Max.
We have several patrons, Max.
But it is important to highlight this. So now that what we're doing with our Patreon is no matter what level you donate at, you get all of the bonus content.
Yeah.
All of it.
That's pretty big.
And then, so we're doing live episodes. We're doing episodes early. You're getting episodes on the comics. A lot of stuff. But you just get to decide at what level you want to support us at, which is a huge help. But regardless, you get all the perks for doing that. So go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/BNB_pod.
$1,000 a month, really good level to
Yeah,
start.
if you want to donate $1,000 a month, that'd be great. But,
yeah. But we'll also accept $1.
It's not a
I don't know if we can do $1.
It's not a backslash.
It's a /.
Thank you.
Correct.
Regardless, any amount matters.
Typical slash you use.
We would appreciate any amount.
All right. Well, let's just jump into it. Let's do that. But before we do,
Your turn to do the recap.
It's never the case, Ben. It is all
It is
odd
your
number
turn.
again. And away we
Your turn?
go.
All right, so there's training for bow bending, and then there's a team huddle, and then Asami gives them new uniforms, and then Bolin's like, oh my god, let's make a move, and then Pabu gets a bath, and then Mako and Bolin talk about Korra, and then Mako tries to talk him out of it, and then Jinora and Iki are like, oh my god, you should fall in love, and then Pima is like, here's the real deal.
15 seconds.
Tenzin and Pima, and then Fire Ferrets, round 2, round 3, they win, celebratory, and then Korra admits to Mako, Asami comes in, awk. Bolin tries to make a move again, Korra goes on a date, Tano's really intimidating, and then Naga goes like,
3,
and
2,
then they spy the
1,
flame noodles, and then...
Stop.
I had a lot more I wanted to cover.
Which is, yeah, stuff happens, but it's a lot of fighting. It's a lot of, like...
Yeah,
pew,
I didn't
pew.
miss a lot, but I also
Pew, pew.
wanted to cover a lot, you know?
Fighting.
Pew, 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 pew.
That's how I...
Is that how it goes?
Yeah.
Okay, so
They're earthbending. Pew,
can
pew.
we talk about competition now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the whole point of the episode, so let's do it.
Okay. So what's competition?
To strive to gain or win something by defeating or establishing superiority.
Thank you, dictionary.com.
I had to go look at what compete means because competition had 3 definitions that were all like the act of competing. You're like,
Cool.
right.
Thanks. Yeah, so, okay, I want to start off by...
Max is here, by the way. Hey, Max.
Max! How are you?
He's behind the window in the studio that we have, though, so sometimes I forget he's there.
Yeah, it's a very opaque window.
Do
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking, Ben.
you have anything... What are your thoughts on competition?
I am not a competitive person. I am a huge sports fan, but not because of competition.
And I think that's something we're going to be able to go in and talk about is what that means.
Yeah.
Like, because there's a lot to unpack around competition. And I think we're going to say things that people are going to
Disagree with?
disagree with.
I
Maybe
love
not.
doing
Maybe
that.
a lot of people who've been listening to this podcast are gonna be like, "No, I'm on board."
Yeah.
But someone who's listening to our Korra comic, podcast for the first time is.
We might rub people the wrong way.
But to be fair, I would also argue that most people, if they're willing to listen to a Korra podcast, are probably in a different headspace than other parts of the fandom.
So, okay, I want to really start by doing a little deep dive first. So there's a dude named Stuart Brown, no relation to Brene Brown. But Max really thought that was funny. Cool. So Stuart Brown is a psychologist that started his research journey in violence. And back in the day when there was a pretty big massacre in Texas, he was called in as one of the people to come and figure out why this happened and to prevent it from ever happening again. And in his research, he found that there was a common thread among these people who had committed these violent atrocities. And one of the through lines in all of his evidential, inquisitions was that play was absent from everyone in some way, shape, or form who had done these violent acts. And so he transitioned from being a violence researcher into being a play researcher. And this is how I found Stuart Brown's content, is because I was thinking about play, and I read his book, and what happened was one of the things that he talks about are the elements of play, right? And one of the things he is clear to nuance the difference between is the difference between contest and competition. And I think it's really, really well articulated in this book, because in the wild, when you see animals playing, for instance, two bear cubs playing, what you see contest, not competition. And so what that looks like is the bear that is clearly stronger, faster, etc., will intentionally handicap themselves in order to prolong the play. Whereas in competition, that is not the case. They will intentionally end it as fast as possible because the end goal is what they're going for, not the play itself. And so for me, I'm interested to explore this nuance in this episode between contest and competition, because I feel like contest is a very positive thing in our lives that helps us gain, grow, become, whereas competition seems to be like an ender, and it seems to not be great. And so I'm curious to kind of look at it through this lens. But that's something that I remember reading from his book that I found really compelling. And so I'm just, what are your thoughts on that as you hear that?
Oh, I think it makes sense, right? Like this idea of, it's almost like if you're playing with a younger sibling, like what's the point of you playing? Is it to
end them?
Is it to demoralize them? Is it to make them feel terrible? Or is it to help them grow, help them learn? It doesn't mean you let them win, right? Like it doesn't mean that, but it is.
But it doesn't mean you crush them immediately, right?
And so I think that there's this idea around what competition does to the brain over time.
Mm-hmm.
And even under the ideas of contest, what you're going for is very different in the sense of one is an extrinsic type of reward, where the other might be a very intrinsic type of reward. You're doing it because it feels good. You're doing it because it's morally right. Like, I'm doing these things so that we get better at these skills, so you learn, so you gain confidence. Like, that's this idea around contest versus I'm proving myself superior is the point of competition. And those are the issue with that is that your extrinsic rewards typically are going to crowd your intrinsic ones that you feel over time, which can be very dangerous.
Interesting.
And so I almost think of it as like, oh, everyone's got to get a participation trophy, right? Like that's this.
Boo.
But what we see and what happens is when we associate winning and competing, maybe that's not the best word, engaging in play in a way that is competitive versus contest, if the work also hasn't been done emotionally to be able to understand that your performance in that competition is not relegate or does not then denote your value as a human, that it can become a very dangerous thing, right? Because then winning becomes the goal, and winning becomes the I'm a good person, winning becomes the I'm the, good enough.
Well, it all comes down to, and a lot of that culture is perpetuated by the car ride home from the soccer game, right? What do your parents or your loved ones or your guardians or whomever you are seeking belonging from, right? What do they say to you on the car ride home? Is it, I'm proud of you, I loved watching you play? Is it, hey, winning is like, that was a really good game. I loved how you scored that last goal and we secured the win, right? Because what is the value you're placing on them playing? Is it them playing or is it them winning?
And again, that also comes to the conversation of you can talk, because a lot of times that conversation gets thrown out there, and if you think about it in terms of like the fire ferrets bending, you can win or you can lose, and then you can have a conversation around what you can do better next time regardless.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's, hey, you're not good enough as a person because you lost this match.
Yeah.
And we see this, honestly, I see this this aspect of losing in almost this competition that's been set up between Bolin and Mako around dating Korra.
I agree.
Because when Bolin sees them kissing, he takes that as a personal, I am not good enough.
Yeah.
Right? I am not with Korra because I personally am not worthy of love in that
Well, it's
regard.
also on the tail end of him having invested a lot in the relationship. Like they've gone on a date, they've had a lot of quality time together, they've been
Which doesn't mean that Korra's then has to date him, right?
correct. No, I'm not implying that she has to at all.
But it is this idea of when he sees that you're heartbroken for many reasons, but it becomes a I'm not good enough moment. When dating is looked at, when relationships with people are looked at as competitive,
Yeah.
we are not in a good space.
Yeah, and I'm going to paint
Ever.
a potentially not generous picture of Mako. But for me, one of the things that we see Mako in is something he recognizes at the end of the episode, which is that he really likes both Korra and Asami, right?
Which happens.
Yeah, that's totally normal. It is totally normal to like more than one person. That is okay. That is awesome. But what happens is it manifests as this like jealousy competition kind of a deal between him and Bolin, where as soon as Bolin's like, oh, what about Korra? He's like, nah, she's not good for me, but I like because I think Azami's a better option. And then as soon as he's like, no, for me, Mako's like, nah, bad option. Don't do that.
Yeah.
And it really feels almost competitive, right? I feel like I wonder if that's the primal teen male instinct, right? And I guess that's probably not a great way to put that. Just this primal thing of like, I need to keep what is mine, of this competition. I need to does that make sense? Is that like help me phrase that better.
Yes, again, when you equate relationships to your own self-worth, you see options for connection as needing to be yours so that you can feel worthy later on. So what happens if Asami falls through? I need to have a fallback. Or what happens if, right? And so like, because if you're attaching your worth to those relationships, we're getting so for Mako, it says, I like both of them. I could date both of them,
but I need to keep them both on a chain.
Correct.
Right.
Because, and again, anytime you feel ownership, anytime you feel, it's the same, even in, in all those all these movies that are always about like two guys, or the bad guy who's dating the girl and the good guy wants to date the girl and all this stuff, and it becomes this very objectifying thing.
It's dehumanizing in a way.
All of it stems to this idea of like secure relationships, relationships and attachment theories, and because if Bolin had a secure attachment theory at this point, which I feel like he actually might, because he comes around on this pretty quickly.
I feel like it's anxiety, it's anxious attachment style on Mako's part.
Correct.
Is what I'm noticing more than anything in Bolin.
Even though he might be a little anxious avoidant. Right?
Maybe a little both. Yeah.
But I think it is this idea of, again, when we are taught through competition that winning is what creates worth, then that is what we will strive to at all costs. So there was a study that was done back a few years ago, and I'm pulling this off of an article from Sander van der Linden, who's a PhD, specifically focusing on social dilemmas. And he brings up this idea of when you watch kids and you create where winning is the goal, not learning the skill, not achieving, but winning is the goal, you see a huge uptick in things like cheating.
Yeah.
Even with young kids, because winning's been made the goal.
Yeah.
But if you are creating this idea around competing, where it is you're learning a new skill, you're achieving something new, don't worry about what someone else is getting when they're hitting an archery target. Like, you worry about you improving.
Yeah.
You see a very different mentality. Kids aren't cheating to get better at that point.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like square rectangle kind of a relationship between competition and contest in that frame, because there are times when that form of competition that you're describing feels like play, because I love growing and getting better. And when I lose, if I'm losing in such a way that I'm being taught a lesson and I can see that lesson, my perspective allows me to see it, then that feels like I'm growing and becoming, and it feels like play. But if the end goal is winning, it doesn't feel like play if I lose, right? It doesn't at all. There's very much like a stake. And one of the elements of play that Stuart Brown outlines is that it's doing things for no apparent reason, right? And so to like sometimes even doing things like, oh, if I lose, it's to win, to learn something, then that ceases to become play in a way. But I'm talking myself in circles. Moral of the story is contest and competition inextricably linked and different.
Also different. And so this actually brings up a question which I don't have data to support an answer, but I will offer up maybe my thoughts and we can talk about it. You get this moment when Korra is engaging with what are they? The Wombats, what's the team name? It's Rami Malek plays the character, but I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
The Wolfbats.
The Wolfbats. Wombats was close.
Yeah, not the buzzard wasps, not the rabbaroos.
Right, the Wolfbats.
The Wolfbats.
When we are competing against someone, do we automatically, because of the way that competition is set up, do we, in our brains, start coming up with stories of why they are the enemy? We either dehumanize them or we create stories in our head to create that they're bad people, whatever we have to do to feel like we need to then dominate. Because I feel like that happens in competitive sports pretty frequently.
Well, and so this moment with Tano is really just...
Tano, thank you.
It's really kind of scary here because we see him kind of like surrounded by like groveling people that are just like lavishing all of their like, ugh, it's gross. Anyway, he just is like leering at Korra and Bolin, and you can tell it's just this, I'm going to intimidate them. Mm-hmm. I am going to just like smother them with my intimidation is what the feeling that I get from this interaction. And so he tries to interact with her, and then he dehumanizes her in a way that is really just gross. Just because and that's a tactic, right? That is a tactic that emerges from the need to win this competition. Because we see him in the next episode, spoiler alert, cheat. We see cheating. We see all these things we're talking about because there's clearly a winning focus for him versus a like competing for the healthy sake of competing contest.
And there's a very big difference between I'm going to compete against these people because we are competing to see who's like under the guise of I want to be the best athlete I can be. Yeah. Right? That's why.
Versus I want to be better than you.
Yeah.
Right. That's a key thing there.
Like I typically see you don't have these rivalries and things like golf. Like very rarely do certain golf fans like hate other golf fans. Because a lot of times, and I'm sure it happens, right? But a lot of times, golf is a sport that and bowling, and there are other sports that are similar, one-person sports where it is, the goal is to be as good as you can be, right? And not necessarily, because the other people's play is not adding or subtracting from your play. And so I wonder if that also, again, alleviates, it's more of contest than it is competition at that point.
Yeah, but I think that this tactic that he's using here is just it feels dirty.
Yes.
It's gross, and it makes me not.
He's in a position
great.
of power. He feels powerful. He's in a position. He knows where he's at. But you'll love the power shift. You'll love the dynamic shift.
I love how Korra handles this.
Yep.
I love it. Oh, I think it's one of Korra's shining moments. Bringing in Naga to just like
out of nowhere. Yeah.
Like, oh god, it's everything. We mentioned attachment style earlier. In this episode we didn't cite the book we get that from. That's attached. Amir Levine.
It is not Adam Levine's book.
Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. Just FYI, that's the book.
And essentially, attachment theories are the different ways that we hold relationships in life. Romantic relationships specifically.
We've definitely talked about it before, but just wanted to cite it again, just to make sure.
But to go back to this idea of why we do things, what is the point of the competition? What is the point of?
And I think that's a question we have to ask.
Bending. What is the purpose of it being there? And
it's not the purpose of pro bending; it's the purpose of our participating in it. Mm-hmm. Like, why am I participating in pro bending?
But even as a fandom, like there are fans for sports teams that are notorious for being brutal, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's the competition aspect that comes out of that. But why, right? Like, if that is not the person we want to be, our producer once was marching at a football game while he was on the drum line, and an Appalachian State fan hit him with a burger before the game. But why? Why? Like, we love Max. Max is a wonderful human being.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, fair. Fair. I do love him.
But, like, competition was the reason for that action. Along with probably other things. But competition was the venue for that
I wonder
action.
if competition...
Maybe he was worried that his team wouldn't be able to catch up.
But okay. I'm not hard to recover from that. But does competition create mob mentality, right? And I think that's the difference. Like, versus, like, we live in a state that is like huge sports rival between UNC Chapel Hill and Duke universities, right? And that is one of the biggest rivalries in ever. And the vitriol that happens from both sides is pretty bad, right?
I am my worst person when I'm, like, watching a Duke UNC basketball game.
Oh, commenting on people's appearance, commenting on, like, tragically ruining them.
There's
with
no
like, yeah.
generous assumption that comes across my mouth.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm my worst self when I am engaging in competitive behavior.
Yeah, I think I am too.
And so if that is, there are benefits to sports. There's benefits to camaraderie and community and the things that sports provides. And also, there are some pretty emotionally damaging aspects to sports.
Well, and something that's really important to lift up between fandoms and Max, you might be able to kind of lift how this feels for you, knowing that you're a huge fan. But, like, what happens between the bonding of a relationship between fans that are on the same side is pretty unreal, right? There's this thing that occurs that makes you so connected. And in a way, I wonder if that bond is where we start to drop our filter. Because we start to feel safe, because we're all on the same team, we're all on the same side, we start to lose that filter and say things that are not as acceptable as we would say in a group that we don't feel that close with. And so, like, what's your experience with that, Max? You're a super fan of a lot of things.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I'm following what point you're trying to make here. I also don't think that I follow teams very, very closely and I root for them very, very hard, but I am a little bit of an exception where, like, I've watched Carolina Duke games with each of y'all, and y'all are much quicker to say mean things about the other team than I am. I'm usually pretty calm, cool, and collected. So,
humble brag.
I think there is a bonding experience that comes with, if I'm in a stadium with other people which, like, that's not happening anytime soon, but, like, I'm much more likely to high five a stranger at a sporting event than anywhere else, if that's what you're trying to say.
I think, in Sunshine, you'll be probably pretty familiar with this, but just this idea of common enemy intimacy is really what's fueling this for me. And that's a Brene Brown term, for those of you who may or may not know her.
I think it can.
Right?
But continue on what common enemy intimacy is, and I think it can.
And so common enemy intimacy is this idea that we build a bond with someone over a common enemy rather than over something else.
And so I think at a sports game, you very easily could build a bond with your love of the team.
Yeah.
You also could very easily build a bond on your hatred for the other team because of your love of the team. And
I think it's just really, we really have to be careful around what is our intention? What is our goal? Are we trying to make connections out of a common enemy, or are we building a connection based off of a our pride in the common team? Is it our care, our love, our like what is it? And I think just something we need to be very careful of as we get into those modes.
But we see the struggles of what competition can do in the way that we see Bolin and Mako interact, the way that we see the way that we see Korra respond to Asami when Asami comes in, does nothing wrong, right? Asami comes in, brings in new uniforms, cool, kisses Mako, they're in a relationship.
Korra's like, bleh!
And Korra is very much against Asami because of this. And again, it goes back to
because
competition.
It feels like she's competing for Mako, right?
So we see these negative aspects of how this competing can
blind us to the fact that I would
relationships.
rather be in relationship with you.
Yeah, they come together later. But
Or is it happening right now?
the baby steps, Ben.
Baby steps.
But
Yeah.
but you get what I'm saying? So, like, we see that competition has these negative aspects to it. And I even look back to when I played high school sports, which is not me reliving the glory days. They were not glory days, but I remember playing baseball and not knowing anybody on the other team, but very much disliking them and talking and being sarcastic towards them and, like, saying rude things. And I had people say rude things to me, and the competition was a part of that, right? Because I also did not have the emotional capacity at that point to navigate those things better. But even now, like, I get snarky when playing Mario Kart 8.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder what that is. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that's rewarded in competition. And I wonder if the goal is to achieve and to be a better athlete and to be stronger and to build camaraderie, is pro bending the way to do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the elements of competition that I think was really beautiful, that I think was less competition but more contest, was this burping contest between Bolin and Korra. Did you catch that?
Very sweet moment.
Like, it was just one of those things where, like, that didn't feel competitive. That felt like contest, right?
Right.
And I think that one could easily label that a competition, but I think that's a misnomer, right? That's a contest, right? And it's one of those things where, like, yeah, they were trying to see who was better, but it was done with both parties, like, mutuality of level of investment in that, right?
And I think that partly goes to no one saw their humanity or worth on the line in that moment.
I think say that again.
No one saw themselves when competing in that contest, their humanity or their worth on the line based on the outcome.
All right, there's the episode, y'all. We're gonna end it there. That was it. Sunshine's awesome, and he nailed it.
But and I think that's where pro sports, even in our society, can be that, right? We see people, quarterbacks who have major respect for each other, no matter what. They're shaking hands. They're fine with it. They want to get better. So I think, like, depending on where you are as a person, competitive things in that nature, if you are approaching it from that side of things, can be fine and healthy and fun and places for camaraderie. The moment that we start equating winning with worth, which is the other side of a pro sports coin, because winning is very literally tied to worth, you start to see issues there.
Yeah, TLDR. Listen to that last 2 minutes. That'll cover everything. But yeah, I just, you know what? Here's the bottom line. The first rule of pro bending is don't line up in a straight line so Korra can knock you out with one shot. I think that's the first rule. That's probably the main rule, and if we follow that, we'll be fine.
Yeah. If you ever get into a pro bending match, you have that there. Anything else we want to talk about in this episode? This might be a little quick one, but I think we've hit on
I think
a lot.
we hit a lot of beautiful things.
Well, because there's really two main aspects of this episode. You've got the relationship
Lots of bending,
aspect, and you've got the pro bending aspect. And I think for both of those, we see the difference between when you equate your worth to winning versus equating your worth to you being worthy regardless. And again, here's the kicker with all of this, because you always hear the argument of, like, participation trophies and there should always be a winner and there should always be a loser and that type of thing. I think that is fine if you are not equating your worth to that. And so you have to be very intentional about the way that you do that when you engage in sports like that.
Well, and it's just like winning. If you do equate winning with worth, that is a form of a meritocracy, right? Where like we receive based off of our merit, and that's just really dangerous, right? When the idea that merit can control like all of the things that we receive and get is really just, it's really dangerous because that just fails to account for a lot of things that we just can't account for. And there's a lot there.
Yeah.
But I don't like it. So moral of the story is, contest over competition, because that's better for human development, and that's the way we should think about it. That is me being judgmental over competition, and I'm okay with it.
All right, we'll be right back with a devotion and a gratitude.
It is my pleasure to bring you back to the pro devotion that we will be giving you now. Anyway, that's my announcer voice. So what we're doing is we're talking about the element of water, and we're also talking about, competition. And so what we're doing now is setting a goal with the lens of competition in combination with the element of water. And so theoretically, we've been through 4 episodes now in Korra where we've kind of talked about this, and we're going to start to talk about that less. But anyway, moral of the story is, here we go. We're setting an intention for the coming week, and we're going to combine those 2 things to help us grow and become and do a little bit better, because self-improvement is one of our goals. So Sunshine, as you think about water and all of that encompasses, and then competition, what's a goal that you want to set for yourself this coming week to help you grow over this next 7 days?
So one of the images that we get in this episode is Korra healing.
We didn't talk about that. Good point. Yeah.
The way she heals Bolin, and what she's able to kind of do with water, and how water kind of represents this way to cleanse, this way to disinfect. And I think, honestly, that's how we have to reshape achievement sometimes, is through this kind of cleansing idea of what it means to do that.
I love that.
And so I work closely with children on a regular basis, and right now we're running a lot of scholastic support programs that are meant to be helping with school as students are navigating virtual learning and things like that. And I think a lot of times we have students who are it's interesting how the competition's almost been taken away because they're doing so much one-on-one work. Mm-hmm. But making sure that we are still kind of developing this idea of like achieving where you're at as we move forward, as opposed to like, you have to be here, you've got to get this right, you've got to be scoring these test grades, but almost how are we learning and achieving as we go along, and making sure that kids are understanding that their self-worth is not tied to a 70 math quiz or a 100 math quiz.
And neither is their potential.
Correct.
Right?
And so I think that that's something that I want to make sure that I'm focusing on with the students that we're supporting this upcoming week, and not just this week, but going forward as well. And I think that that's something that we do, but I think it's also something that needs intention. So.
And we can always reassess. That's something that always deserves focus and reassessment, just to make sure, right? Because there's just so much on the line when we're taking care of children. So yeah, I think I value that. Thank you for lifting that up.
Absolutely.
So for me, as I think about myself, I grew up with 4 older brothers, 6 older siblings. And so from a very early age, competition was something that I struggled with, because I was always competing with my brothers. I was always, my worth was on the line, and on whether I could be better than, if I could eventually grow to become better than my siblings at whatever they were doing, because they were always older, stronger, faster than I was.
Right.
And so for me, as I think about coming into this next week, I think about all the times when I'm in play And what happens is that starts to become tainted by this idea of competition. And what I mean by that is I'll be playing a board game with friends, and I will go on a winning streak, and then I will at the height of my winning streak, I become this jerk that will say things that is like the opposite of humble. Like, it's so great in my magnanimity that I'm welcoming you to call me master. And like, it's just like I become smug and kind of a jerk. And it's one of those things where like that in small doses is playful, but that over time becomes painful, and it becomes like, who wants to interact with this guy? And so how do I, and the reason I tie that, and I'm tying that to water rather, by thinking about as I am water that is fluid and flowing, and over time I start to freeze, and then it becomes slush, and then I become this stagnant ice block that is unbudging and unmoving. And I think that that's something that I need to constantly reassess and be like, okay, I'm starting to freeze and I need to thaw out a little bit. And so I need to humble myself, and here are the tactics that I can do to humble myself and remember that like me winning on this board game does not make me king of the world. And so that's not that I win all the time, but like when I do go on a winning streak, I become not great. So that's my thinking this week is, how do I thaw myself out when I'm in that mode? Does that make sense?
I love that visual. I really do love that visual of some of these sometimes being a freezing moment. And it also kind of shows that's not necessarily a thing that you can do immediately. That sometimes the thawing has to take time.
Yeah,
and like
exactly.
that's not something that can happen just with the snap of your fingers. That takes intention and putting the ice in a place where it's going to be able to thaw.
Yep.
And that it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. So I love that kind of imagery floating around.
Well, thank you.
Gratitude.
Mine was so much better than yours.
Yeah, so good. Yours was good. And yep.
I'm gonna go thaw out now.
Choosing devotions is not something I necessarily feel self-worth over. So
Yeah, not competitive. You don't feel competitive over that?
over that, no.
The 30-second recap, however, also not competitive.
Well, that's because I win them.
Whoa! Let's move to gratitude before I become smug.
All right, I'm going to give gratitude to Bolin this
You just moved out of
episode.
that really fast, and I feel like my self-worth is on the line. What?
I'm going to
Bolin?
give gratitude to Bolin. And I think that there's a lot of things that I love the conversation he has with Mako on the way up. Like, are we going to be okay? Recognizing that they're not in a place where they want to be. But I also love his agency when he chooses.
A lot of people aren't willing to have that conversation.
Right.
Right? That's just a really beautiful moment that just... That's
big. That question is big.
Yeah. Yes.
But it also shows that he recognizes that the competition shouldn't be something that...
It's not bigger than our relationship.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. And so I love that. I also love the agency of the way that he kind of has Mako back off from the tiebreaker. Hey, this is something I feel confident in doing. I feel like your head's not in the right space right now.
Yeah.
It's not a you're not good enough. It's not a I'm better than you. It's a at this moment I think I can be the most supportive here. And that's something that I really appreciate from Bolin in this episode.
Yeah, I just... That's such a beautiful moment. And it's just a moment of awareness, right? Like that awareness is so key. And I just...
And the agency that comes with being able... Like, that's a very vulnerable decision. Because
Yes.
Mako could have very easily been like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But in that same turn, Mako, I think, recognizes as well, like, I think you're right. Like, this is a time for you to shine. And
I just wonder how often I haven't said something like that because I've worried about the repercussions when Mako was just like, you're right, you know?
Mm-hmm. Or how often I've had that said to me, and I am the poor reaction, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I almost think of that, even not in a competition sense, but when someone's like, hey, is this something you need help with at work? No, I got it. I can do it.
Yes,
when
please.
when the reality is, yes, please, this is something I would love for you to take off my plate.
Yeah.
And so just asking someone is there something I can do to help just asking someone or letting someone know, like, hey, I think this is a place that I can step in and be supportive if you would like.
Yeah.
Is something I really appreciated from Bolin in this episode.
Speaking of support, that kind of leads into my gratitude.
Totally planned.
So I'm grateful for Asami. And we see Asami be nothing but supportive in this episode. She shows up in the beginning and is saying, hey, I got these uniforms for you. Then she's like, hey, let me go take Mako on a date. And I'm like really supportive of Mako. And then she shows up to the pro bending tournament, shows up afterwards and says, you did, like, it's just unending support for Mako. And I'm just
we
like,
stan Asami.
Yeah, she is awesome.
Especially knowing what she's about to endure.
Right? Yeah, God, but like,
She's about to have a lot to deal with.
She is proving herself to be just more and more of the support system that these Mako and Korra eventually that they need, right? We see this support starting now, so that when we see her support for Korra later on in the series, it's not a surprise. It is a continued demonstration of her beautiful personality, and I just think that seeing this here is just the start, and I love watching the foundation for that for us and that character building, and it's just, she's awesome. She's so cool, and like, super stan account. I'm all for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go Asami.
What a way to wrap up the episode. This is a little short one, but it was, I think, a good one. I think one that was positive.
Lots of cool stuff.
And then we got some really cool guests coming up later on this season still.
Super cool guests.
But as Max, you got anything you want to add?
Not at this time.
All right. Well,
that's a good talk.
remember to follow us in all the places. BNB_pod. That's Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of the things.
Facebook. Bending Not Breaking.
That's right. And then on Patreon as well, if you would like to get some bonus content that we talked about earlier.
Remember, our Patreon has changed, right?
Yeah, we already talked about it.
This episode?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We brought it up.
I love that. I just want to reiterate it then. Super cool.
Yeah.
You should join us.
Come support.
$1,000
Live
donations?
episodes. Join us on Zoom calls. We'll talk more about Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. It'll be great.
Yeah.
I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
This is Ben.
And this has been Bending Not Breaking. Thank you so much for listening.
Goodbye.